Sometimes the fire that destroys a life doesn't start with hate. It starts with hope. Robert Mitchell thought his generosity would finally give him the family he never had. Marina Vasquez thought she'd found the perfect provider for her 5 adult daughters. But when kindness meets greed, when sacrifice becomes mockery, and when a man's heart breaks in silence while others laugh at his pain, the consequences can be devastating. This is the story of how $200,000, 18 months of blind faith, and one man's desperate need to belong led to a night that would leave 6 adults fighting for their lives in a house he paid for. Chapter 1. The Gentle Provider. Robert Mitchell had never imagined that wealth would feel so hollow. At 58, he possessed everything that most men his age dreamed of achieving. A paid-off house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, investment accounts that generated steady income, and enough savings to last several lifetimes. Yet each morning, when he woke to the silence of his empty home, the numbers in his bank account felt meaningless against the weight of his solitude. The money had come from loss, not luck. His parents had been savers, Depression-era children who hoarded every penny and invested wisely in real estate and blue-chip stocks. When they passed within 6 months of each other, Robert inherited their careful accumulation of decades. Then came the devastating blow that changed everything. His wife Margaret's cancer diagnosis at 54. The medical bills that followed would have bankrupted most families, but Robert's inheritance meant he could afford every treatment, every specialist, every experimental therapy that offered even a glimmer of hope. None of it mattered. Margaret died anyway, leaving him with more money than he could spend and no one to spend it on. Robert had worked as a senior accountant for the same firm for 28 years, managing other people's finances with meticulous precision. His colleagues respected his competence. His clients trusted his judgment, but few people knew him beyond his professional reputation. He was the man who remembered every tax deadline, who never made computational errors, who arrived early and stayed late without complaint. But he was also the man who ate lunch alone, who declined invitations to office parties, who slipped away quietly at the end of each workday to return to his increasingly silent world. The neighborhood where Robert lived had slowly transformed around him. Young families moved in, filled the sidewalks with children's laughter and bicycle races, and created the kind of vibrant community life that felt both wonderful and painfully distant. He would watch from his kitchen window as fathers taught their sons to throw footballs, as mothers pushed strollers during evening walks, as entire families gathered for backyard barbecues that stretched late into summer nights. His generosity had become legendary among those who noticed. When the elderly widow 3 doors down struggled with her heating bill, an anonymous cashier's check appeared in her mailbox. When a high school student across the street needed funds for a class trip, Robert quietly covered the expense through the school counselor. He donated to every charity that knocked on his door, supported every fundraiser that crossed his desk, and never asked for recognition or thanks. People called him kind, dependable, and genuinely caring. They also whispered that he was too generous for his own good, too trusting, too eager to help others without protecting himself. These observations would prove prophetic, though Robert himself remained unaware of how his desperate hunger for connection was slowly becoming visible to those who knew how to exploit such vulnerabilities. Chapter 2. A Family in Crisis. Marina Vasquez had perfected the art of survival through charm and desperation. At 32, she possessed the kind of striking beauty that commanded attention in crowded rooms. Long dark hair that caught light like silk, expressive brown eyes that could shift from vulnerable to fierce in seconds, and a smile that had gotten her out of more tight spots than she cared to count. But beneath the carefully maintained exterior lay a woman drowning in financial chaos, raising 5 adult daughters who had never learned the meaning of self-sufficiency. The cramped 3-bedroom rental house on Maple Street had been their home for 6 years, though calling it a home was generous. The carpet bore permanent stains from countless spills and accidents. The kitchen appliances wheezed with age, and the heating system worked sporadically during the winter months. Marina shared the master bedroom with her youngest daughter, Nicole, while the other 4 women rotated between the remaining bedrooms and the living room couch, depending on who was currently employed or unemployed. Jessica, the eldest at 28, had dropped out of community college twice and now spent her days scrolling through social media. While half-heartedly searching for jobs, she was perpetually overqualified for in her own mind. Ashley, 26, worked part-time at a department store, but spent most of her paycheck on clothes and cosmetics she convinced herself were necessary for maintaining her appearance. Brittany, 24, had abandoned her nursing program after 2 semesters and now claimed she was exploring her artistic side, though her art consisted mainly of taking selfies for Instagram. Samantha, 22, had embraced the influencer lifestyle with 15,000 followers who watch her post daily content about fashion and lifestyle tips while living in her mother's overcrowded house. Nicole, 18 and fresh out of high school, had shown the most promise academically, but was quickly learning to follow her sister's example of expecting others to provide for her needs. None of the daughters contributed meaningfully to household expenses. They lived in a state of perpetual financial emergency where every month brought new crises. Overdue rent notices, utility disconnection warnings, car payments missed, and credit cards maxed out. Marina had become an expert at juggling bills, making partial payments, and sweet-talking landlords into granting extensions. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October, giving them 30 days to pay 3 months of back rent or vacate the premises. Marina stared at the official document with a mixture of panic and resignation. She had exhausted every favor, every extension, every excuse. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, had been patient for longer than most would have been, but his own financial obligations meant he could no longer carry tenants who consistently failed to pay. That evening, as autumn rain drummed against the windows of their soon-to-be former home, Marina gathered her daughters around the kitchen table and showed them the notice. The reactions ranged from tears to anger to sullen silence, but notably absent was any acknowledgement of personal responsibility or suggestions for immediate solutions. It was during this family crisis meeting that fate intervened in the form of a gentle knock on their front door. Chapter 3. Building a Dream. The knock on Marina's door that rainy October evening came from Robert Mitchell, who had been walking past when he noticed the family gathered around their kitchen table through the thin curtains. He had seen the distress on their faces, the papers scattered before them, and something in their collective desperation had stirred the same instinct that had driven him to help countless neighbors over the years. When Marina opened the door, her eyes red from recent tears, Robert introduced himself as the man from 2 blocks over who had often seen the family walking together. He explained that he had noticed they seemed upset and wondered if everything was all right. The genuine concern in his voice, combined with his non-threatening appearance and obvious sincerity, prompted Marina to invite him inside. Within minutes, Robert learned about the eviction notice, the mounting bills, and the impossible situation facing 6 women who had nowhere else to go. He listened without judgment as Marina explained their circumstances, her voice breaking as she described the fear of homelessness that haunted her nights. The daughters remained mostly silent during this conversation, though their worried expressions spoke volumes about their shared anxiety. Robert's response was immediate and practical. He offered to speak with their landlord about working out a payment arrangement, suggesting that sometimes a third party could negotiate solutions that seemed impossible to the people directly involved. Marina accepted gratefully, though she warned him that Mr. Peterson had already shown considerable patience and was unlikely to extend further mercy. The next morning, Robert visited Peterson at his real estate office. Rather than requesting another extension, Robert proposed something entirely different. He would pay the outstanding rent immediately, along with a substantial security deposit to ensure future payments. In exchange, he asked only that Peterson give the family a chance to stabilize their situation. Peterson, surprised by this unexpected intervention from a stranger, agreed to the arrangement. When Robert returned to Marina's house that afternoon with news that their immediate crisis had been resolved, the reaction overwhelmed him. All 6 women surrounded him with tears of relief and gratitude, their embraces and thanks filling an emotional void he had carried for years. For the first time since Margaret's death, Robert felt genuinely needed by people who appreciated his presence. The daughters' initial acceptance of Robert was enthusiastic and seemingly genuine. Jessica thanked him repeatedly for saving their home. Ashley hugged him tight and called him their guardian angel. Brittany promised to paint his portrait as a gift. Samantha posted about their family's blessing on social media. And Nicole shyly asked if she could call him Papa Rob, a nickname that made his heart swell with unexpected joy. Over the following weeks, Robert found himself visiting the Vasquez household regularly. What began as check-ins to ensure their stability evolved into shared meals, family conversations, and a sense of belonging that he had never experienced. When smaller financial emergencies arose, Robert quietly handled them without being asked, viewing his assistance as investments in the family relationship he was finally able to build. Chapter 4. Cracks in Paradise. By the spring of 2023, Robert had invested over $80,000 in the Vasquez household, and the transformation was remarkable. The family now lived in financial stability for the first time in years, with all bills current, reliable transportation, and enough grocery money to keep the refrigerator consistently stocked. Robert had quietly handled car repairs, medical expenses, and even helped Jessica enroll in a new certification program that she swore would finally launch her career. What Robert failed to notice, however, was how quickly gratitude had evolved into expectation. Marina no longer expressed surprise or overwhelming thanks when he covered unexpected expenses. Instead, she began presenting financial needs as simple facts that required his immediate attention. A utility bill became his responsibility to handle. A car payment was automatically his concern to manage. Her requests transformed from humble appeals into casual assumptions about his obligation to provide. The shift was subtle but unmistakable to outside observers. Neighbors began noticing Marina's new confidence, the way she carried herself with an air of entitlement that had not existed during her months of desperation. She started shopping at upscale stores, posting social media photos that showcased designer purchases and restaurant meals that clearly exceeded any income she'd generated from her sporadic part-time work at a local salon. Marina's social media presence became increasingly elaborate during this period. She crafted an image of a successful single mother who had overcome adversity through her own determination and hard work. Her posts featured expensive clothing, professional manicures, and family outings to trendy restaurants. But notably absent was any mention of Robert or acknowledgement of the financial support that made such a lifestyle possible. The daughters followed their mother's lead with disturbing consistency. Their initial warmth toward Robert gradually cooled into polite tolerance, then casual dismissal. Jessica stopped updating him about her certification program progress. Ashley no longer bothered to thank him for covering her car insurance, and Brittany abandoned her promise to paint his portrait. Samantha began posting social media content that portrayed their family as self-sufficient and thriving, while Nicole, the youngest, started spending more time away from home, claiming she felt uncomfortable around Robert's constant presence. The most significant change came when Marina joined a local fitness center in March. She claimed the membership was necessary for her health and self-confidence, and Robert dutifully covered the monthly fees without question. What he did not anticipate was how quickly the gym would become the center of Marina's social life, introducing her to people who represented everything Robert was not: young, physically attractive, and completely unaware of her recent financial struggles. Marcus Rodriguez was 28 years old, a personal trainer whose sculpted physique and easy charm made him popular among the gym's female clientele. Unlike Robert, who approached relationships with careful consideration and long-term commitment in mind, Marcus operated with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to temporary connections and minimal emotional investment. Marina's attraction to Marcus was immediate and obvious to everyone except Robert. She began extending her gym sessions far beyond any reasonable workout duration, often returning home late in the evening with elaborate explanations about new fitness routines and extended cool-down periods. Her phone, which had previously been accessible and unremarkable, became a closely guarded device that she kept face down and password protected. Robert's attempts to maintain their established routine of shared dinners and family conversations met increasing resistance. Marina claimed exhaustion from her new fitness regimen, while the daughters developed sudden commitments and obligations that conveniently coincided with his usual visiting hours. Chapter 5. When Kindness Becomes Weakness. The stroke came without warning on a humid Tuesday morning in June. Robert had been carrying groceries to his car when the left side of his body suddenly went numb, his vision blurred, and his carefully organized world tilted sideways. A neighbor found him collapsed in the parking lot, conscious but unable to speak clearly, his face displaying the unmistakable asymmetry that emergency responders immediately recognized. 3 weeks in a hospital, followed by months of rehabilitation, left Robert permanently changed. The doctors explained that while he had survived with his cognitive abilities intact, the physical damage was irreversible. His left arm remained largely useless, his left leg required assistance for walking, and eventually he would need a wheelchair for longer distances. The independent man who had once handled everyone else's problems now struggled with basic daily tasks. During his hospitalization, Marina and the daughters visited regularly, bringing flowers and expressing concern that seemed genuine. Robert felt touched by their apparent devotion and looked forward to returning to the house where he had found his chosen family. He imagined they would rally around him during his recovery, perhaps growing closer through the experience of caring for someone who had cared so deeply for them. The reality proved devastatingly different. Within days of his return to the Vasquez household, the family's true feelings about his altered condition became painfully clear. Marina, who had once greeted him warmly at the door, now treated his arrival as an inconvenience. When he struggled to navigate the steps leading to the front porch, she watched from the window rather than offering assistance. When he asked for help reaching items on high shelves, she sighed audibly and complained about the constant demands on her time. The daughter's transformation was even more shocking. Jessica openly mocked his slurred speech during phone conversations with friends, imitating his pronunciation difficulties for comedic effect. Ashley complained loudly about the time it took him to complete simple tasks, comparing his slowness to watching paint dry. Brittany posted social media videos that featured his wheelchair in the background with captions about dealing with difficult situations, while Samantha began referring to him as the burden when she thought he was out of earshot. Most crushing was Nicole's complete withdrawal from their previously warm relationship. The young woman who had affectionately called him Papa Rob now avoided eye contact and left the room when he entered. When he attempted to maintain their traditional conversations about her college plans, she responded with monosyllabic answers and obvious impatience. The arrival of Marcus at the household marked the final stage of Robert's humiliation. Marina no longer bothered to hide their relationship, allowing Marcus to move into the master bedroom of the house that Robert's money had secured. Marcus treated Robert with casual disrespect, using his bathroom, eating food from his grocery purchases, and sitting in his preferred chair without acknowledgement or permission. The psychological impact proved more devastating than the physical limitations. Robert found himself relegated to a small bedroom that had previously served as storage, listening through thin walls as Marina and Marcus laughed together in spaces he had made possible. The women who had once called him their savior now treated him as an embarrassing reminder of their previous desperation, a man whose usefulness had expired along with his physical capabilities. Chapter 6. The Final Betrayal. The eviction notice arrived on a scorching August morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who seemed embarrassed to be serving papers to a man in a wheelchair. Robert stared at the legal document with confusion, reading the words repeatedly as if they might rearrange themselves into something more comprehensible. According to the paperwork, Marina Vasquez was requesting his immediate removal from the property for violation of lease terms and disturbing the peace of other residents. The cruel irony was not lost on him. The house he had saved from foreclosure, the mortgage he had paid in full, the property taxes he continued to cover monthly, all of it legally belonged to Marina because his generosity had never included protecting his own interests. His name appeared nowhere on official documents, making him nothing more than an unwelcome guest in the home his money had secured. Marina's justification for the eviction was particularly calculated. She claimed that Robert's medical condition created an unsafe environment for her daughters, that his mobility issues and occasional disorientation posed risks to the household. She cited incidents where he had requested help with basic tasks as evidence of his inability to live independently, painting his vulnerability as a threat rather than a need for compassion. The legal proceedings moved swiftly because Robert had no standing to contest them. Within 2 weeks, he found himself once again packing his meager belongings while watching Marina direct Marcus in rearranging furniture to erase any trace of his presence. The daughters showed no emotion as they witnessed his departure, treating the scene as if a temporary house guest was finally leaving after an extended stay. The most devastating discovery came when Robert was organizing his possessions in his original apartment. Hidden in a folder of medical documents, he found his old phone, which he had replaced after his stroke. When he powered it on to transfer important contacts, he discovered dozens of voice recordings that the device had automatically saved from conversations in the Vasquez household. The recordings revealed conversations that shattered what remained of his faith in human decency. Marina's voice, crystal clear, laughing as she described him to Marcus as pathetic and completely wrapped around my finger. The daughters joined in, mocking his speech difficulties, imitating his struggles with mobility, referring to him as the walking wallet who was too stupid to realize he was being used. One recording captured Jessica explaining to a friend how they had all learned to manipulate Robert's emotions by pretending to care about his opinions and stories. Another featured Brittany coaching Nicole on how to act grateful when he gave her money for college expenses, although she had no intention of using it for education. Most painful was Samantha's detailed description of their group chat, where they shared jokes about his pathetic attempts to be part of their family. The final recording was a conversation between Marina and Marcus discussing their future plans. Marina expressed relief that Robert's stroke had made him easier to control, while Marcus suggested ways to legally remove him from the house once they no longer needed his financial support. Their laughter as they discussed his obvious loneliness and desperate need for connection created a sound that would haunt Robert's remaining nights. The psychological impact of these discoveries transformed Robert's grief into something far more dangerous. The man who had spent his entire life believing in the power of kindness and generosity now faced the crushing realization that his fundamental understanding of human nature had been catastrophically wrong. Every act of charity, every gesture of love, every sacrifice he had made had been met with mockery and exploitation. As autumn nights grew longer, Robert began making plans that had nothing to do with healing or moving forward. Chapter 7. Ashes and Judgment. The fire department received the call at 11:47 p.m. on a crisp October evening. The house on Maple Street was fully engulfed when the first truck arrived, flames shooting through windows and smoke billowing into the night sky. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, some recording the destruction on their phones, others calling out names and pointing toward the house with growing panic. The discovery of Robert Mitchell sitting calmly in his wheelchair at the curb, watching the inferno consume the home he had purchased, immediately drew the attention of responding officers. His presence at the scene, combined with his obvious connection to the property, raised immediate suspicions that were confirmed when investigators found accelerant residue on his clothing and wheelchair. The investigation revealed a methodical plan executed with accounting precision. Robert had spent weeks purchasing gasoline in small quantities from different stations, storing containers in his apartment garage. Security footage from multiple locations showed him making these purchases with the same careful deliberation he had once applied to managing client portfolios. More damning was the digital evidence found on his devices. Robert had researched fire patterns, ventilation systems, and escape routes with the thoroughness of someone conducting a professional assessment. His browser history revealed searches for legal precedents involving arson cases, sentencing guidelines, and prison conditions for elderly inmates. The recordings he had discovered proved crucial to understanding his motivation. Prosecutors played segments during the trial where Marina and her daughters mocked his disabilities, planned his removal from the house, and laughed about their successful manipulation of his emotions and finances. The jury listened in uncomfortable silence as these women celebrated their exploitation of a vulnerable man's desperate need for connection. The defense argued that Robert's actions resulted from a psychological break caused by systematic emotional abuse and financial exploitation. Expert witnesses testified about the effects of prolonged manipulation on elderly individuals, particularly those dealing with health crises and social isolation. The recordings, they argued, revealed a campaign of deliberate cruelty that would have broken most people's psychological defenses. Marina and her daughters survived the fire with serious injuries, but no fatalities. All 6 women required extensive medical treatment for smoke inhalation and burns, with Jessica and Ashley facing the longest recovery periods. The irony that Robert's money continued to pay their medical bills through insurance policies he had purchased was not lost on courtroom observers. The trial lasted 6 weeks and drew significant media attention, largely because it challenged simple narratives about victims and perpetrators. Robert's neighbors testified about his decades of quiet generosity, his care for his dying wife, and his obvious loneliness after her death. Yet prosecutors successfully argued that financial exploitation, however cruel, did not justify attempted murder. The verdict delivered mixed satisfaction to both sides. Robert was convicted of arson and multiple counts of attempted murder, receiving a sentence of 40 years in prison. At his age and with his health conditions, this effectively amounted to a life sentence. Yet the judge's comments acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances that had driven his actions, noting that the case revealed failures in systems designed to protect vulnerable elderly individuals from exploitation. The Vasquez family civil lawsuit seeking damages was dismissed when it was revealed that Robert had no remaining assets. His inheritance had been completely drained by their household expenses and his legal defense costs. The women who had lived lavishly on his generosity for 18 months now faced the same financial instability that had originally brought them to his attention. Community reaction remained divided years after the trial concluded. Some viewed Robert as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked generosity and the predatory nature of people who exploit kindness. Others saw him as a broken man whose fundamental decency had been weaponized against him by individuals who understood exactly how to manipulate his emotional vulnerabilities. The house on Maple Street was eventually demolished, the lot remaining empty as a stark reminder of how quickly lives can be destroyed when exploitation meets desperation. Robert Mitchell died in prison 3 years after his conviction, maintaining until his final days that his only regret was trusting people who had never deserved his faith. When kindness becomes a weapon used against you, how far is too far? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology behind crimes that shake us to our core. Until next time, stay safe out there.